Hey friends out there in YouTube land, Robert Hamm here. Today I want to talk to you about the box, PinBox specifically. Had a great time in Findlay, Ohio. More on that to come. But I went and hung out with you guys, film photography project listeners and podcasters and everything over in Findlay, Ohio. We had a great time at the walking workshop. I've got over 100 images that I took from that place. That's up on the website, my website at roberthamphotography.com. I'll leave a link down below so anybody that didn't get a chance to join can check in all the fun. Let's talk about apertures. PinBox is going to ship with an aperture of your choice, and some of you may not be familiar with what aperture is best. So let me help you with that. First of all, PinBox, as I designed it, has a 30mm focal length, and that's very important because aperture and focal length are joined. They are a ratio of one another. Specifically, here you go. At a 100 micron aperture, at a 30mm focal length, that's f300. That's one of your choices. You're going to have 150 micron or 200 micron, all the way up to a 600 micron. So which one of these is best? And let's kind of go into that. I consider general purpose apertures around 150 to 250, but really around the 250 or 200 range. And here's why. At 250 microns, your aperture is an f-stop of 120, f120, at 30 millimeters. That means that you're going to be able to work outside and you're going to have exposure times in the tens of seconds depending on the day and the exposure at ISO 100. So let's say you're shooting and it's a beach scene like I experience quite a bit where the exposure value is very high outside, like a 17 or a 16 by the water. At an f120 on 100 speed film, you're going to have an exposure time of somewhere between 12 and 19 seconds depending on if you're facing into the sun or parallel with the sun or away from the sun. And that's very important. And it could go there. These are just generalities. Make sure to use your app on your phone to help you get a good dial-in. However, if you go down to something like a 100 micron aperture, which is an f-stop of 300, you're going to change that into minutes. Now that's pretty cool if you want to show the waves coming in the glass on the water. It's also pretty cool if you want to show like the movement of a dramatic sky. You remember, pinhole photography lets you show something that others can't, the other types of photography can't, and that is the passage of time. So longer exposure times are very good here. Now, I prefer at the beach a very low aperture, something like 100 microns, an f300, or 150 microns, which would be f200. But what about using that same aperture at nighttime? I find that when you get into evenings and sunsets and then you go into night and cityscape photography, that an aperture of 300 is just too much, too small, because it takes your exposure times and turns them from minutes into hours. You get tens of minutes, 20 minutes, possibly up to an hour depending on what kind of subject you've got. And of course we're still using the 100 ISO base here as a point of reference. So for me, when talking about all this, the reason I consider something like an f250 or a 250 micron or 200 micron aperture, kind of the general purpose apertures, it's because you kind of get some spillover between daylight photography, real short, and nighttime evening photography, moderately short, so the timeline is kind of the same. Now, all of these are generalities. When you move on up the ladder to larger pinholes, 300 and 600, which I'll be offering for you guys, a 300 micron aperture is f100, right, at 30 millimeters, and a 600 micron aperture, of course, is f50 at 30 millimeters. These things are like night hawks. They're great for working at night. They are terrible, in my opinion, for working during the day. When you get into something like an f50 during the day at ISO 100, you're getting into, on a pinhole camera, a shutter time that will be something that's very difficult for you to calculate, half second, quarter of a second, an eighth of a second, 1/20th of a second. So we stay away from those during the day. However, at nighttime, you get into times that are very manageable, which is several minutes to 30 seconds or 40 seconds, and the bigger the aperture, the shorter your exposure time at night. Also, a note on the the 600 micron aperture at 30 millimeters is f50, but that's usually used, a 600 micron aperture is usually used at 300 millimeters or more in medium format photography for pinholes, which is kind of cool. Which means that when we use it here, that just slightly, it's 0.6 of a millimeter, so just over half a millimeter wide is the aperture opening. That creates some really cool halide and like haloing effects that you get on like street lights and cars and anything that's reflective in your photography, and it's especially noticeable at with black and white photos. So if you're out there photographing and you want a more specialized aperture for use, that's when I would suggest going with that 600 micron aperture, which is the f50 for our use. And this is very important. I know this has been kind of dry, but here's the final thing I want you to know. Remember, PinBox is built on a replace, reuse mentality. So the box is replaceable. If you need to get into it and grab that aperture, just tear it out and reuse the aperture. And that's the point. The aperture is reusable. They're 302 Bravo stainless steel that's being used to create these apertures on a vinyl disc that I create and apply them to. The apertures are all acid etched, so you've got a disc that you can reuse from one box to another. So if you need to replace the cardboard, go for it. If you want to try something different, go for it. And that's why understanding what your aperture is going to do is very important. There are no last notes, only questions. If you have any that you need explained, please reach out to me through messaging of some sort. I will help you make this choice, and this will be your main choice for PinBox on the Backer Kit surveys. And by the way, Backer Kit is handling the surveys. They will be coming out soon, so you'll go to the Backer Kit website to do all this stuff. Now, I will also have a kit available for a complete pinhole kit for $22, I believe it is. And then individual pinholes are just $6 each. Additional winding keys are also $6. Additional pin boxes are $20 if you'd like the full kit, and wraps are $5 as well. If there's a wrap that you'd like, but you don't want the theme that I've suggested, email me ahead of time. I'll tell you if I've got the ability to get a theme like baseball or space, and that way you'll know if you should use an add-on or not. Also, I generally will not be applying the add-on wrap to your PinBox. That's something you would do. If you would like me to apply it, you'll need to send me an email specifically about that. Guys, I'm Robert Hamm. We've been talking about PinBox today. I hope you have found this little update helpful. I want to thank you for watching and remind you I will catch you on the flip side.